Let's go ahead and start tonight with our recitation of prayers as we've been doing. So again, we'll recite the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha together just one time. Again, thinking about the amazing qualities of the Buddha that we all can attain as well, that are embodied in this praise. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And we'll do the short mandala offering in English, making this vast, pure offering. Imagine sending that out to the holy beings to receive these teachings and receive the blessings to be able to realize these teachings in our minds as quickly as possible. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hidam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then refuge first in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soke chodnama jantu bardu dakne kyapsu che dake chanyan gipe sanangi dola benchir sangye duparsho Sangye chodang soke chodnama Jamchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chunyan gipe sanamgi dola penchir sange druparsho. Let's do a short meditation before we begin the class. Can spend the first few minutes just focusing on the breath to calm the mind, focus the mind. And then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation together. So find a good meditation posture and begin with meditating on the breath. So now let's set our motivation for this evening. And we can do this by reflecting on some of what we discussed last week in terms of the spiritual teacher. Every one of us has met with Dharma teachings in some way, given to us through the kindness of a teacher or guide. Maybe reflect for just a little while on the qualities of those beings that you have had the good fortune to encounter. Perhaps you've had teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, any of these great Geshes, Rinpoches in our tradition, or any other teachers that we've had. And just spend a minute or two reflecting on some of those qualities that we discussed and how these teachers embody those qualities for us, how we can see them in those teachers, admire them, and feel some confidence in the guidance that they have given us because of that. So just reflect on that briefly. And then, although we didn't discuss this last week, we might reflect on the fact that these gurus, these teachers, these guides, by having these qualities, are pointing out to us the qualities that we can develop ourselves. And generate some of that confidence that you have the seeds of those qualities within your own mind. Through engaging in the path, through study, through reflection, meditation, we can accomplish the state of Buddhahood with the kindness of our gurus guiding us on the way. So reflect on that you have all these same qualities that you see in your guides in a form, kind of a latent form within ourselves, there to be fully developed, to manifest into the state of Buddhahood, enlightenment. And of course, part of making that manifest is directing our minds in that particular vein to think that we're here tonight, once more with the mind of bodhicitta, the mind that aspires to develop ourselves completely, so we can benefit all sentient beings perfectly, spontaneously, without any effort. Attaining the state of Buddhahood, we then will be able to work for countless sentient beings, bringing them to achieve their potential in the same way that our spiritual guides are guiding us to achieve ours. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll start tonight's class. So again, well, thank you everyone for joining again tonight. This is our 6th class. I'll mention at the end of class tonight as well, we do have a 2-week break because next Wednesday is Losar, Tibetan New Year. And so at the center here, I'll be leading a Guru Puja that you're more than welcome to come for. That'll be from 7 o'clock to 8:30 here in Mountain Time. So roughly the same time as this class. But that will be happening next Wednesday. So we do have a little bit of a break. And then there will also be another Wednesday after that I won't be teaching because I'm in California and need to teach at some of the centers that have invited me there. And then there will be another break yet. And then I'll finally be back here for a more continuous chain of classes to lead out the rest of this course, this part 1 of this study of the middle length Lamrim. So anyway, that's all in your calendar, your course outline. Nothing has really changed from there, so you can refer to that just to be sure you've got the right dates. So what we are working with in this, and I mentioned, of course, is the spiritual teacher, this topic. And last week we looked at kind of the first two topics, which have to do with the qualities of the guru, the teacher that we are seeking. And then, of course, our own qualities that we need to have as a good disciple in order to make good use of that relationship. I think it's in one book I was reading recently. I can't remember the author's name. He's a Kagyu master. But he says that kind of this guru and disciple, it's kind of like the clay that goes into the mold. We have to have a good mold so that what we are making will be perfectly according to that. But we have to have good clay in order to make that statue in that mold. We're the clay that is going to be made into the image, perhaps, of our gurus, and our gurus are the molds. So we're looking for the ideal mold that we want to be shaped in the form of, in a sense. They do have that phrase, I think I mentioned it last week, that be careful who you choose as your guru because you're going to end up just like them. So we want to have this as our shopping list, our 10 things that we're ideally looking for. But of course, if we also have qualities, the 5 that we talked about, well, then we're much more discerning and much more capable of engaging in that process of finding a good teacher. So that's actually where we left off last week. We were looking at these 5 qualities. Let me back it up just one page here, where we saw that, again, there were, go back again. The first 3 that were set out in Aryadeva's text, impartial, intelligent, and interested. Again, so we have to kind of have that unbiased mind that isn't coming into a relationship with the guru with the wrong perceptions and what have you. And then, to be attached to our own approach, be kind of not willing to look at things that someone else is exposing you to in terms of new teachings and what have you. The second one being kind of intelligent and discerning so that we can actually differentiate what the teacher is saying as good, bad, find fault, overcome some of that might be there, again, so that we make sure that we're a suitable vessel to receive these teachings. And then the last one being kind of interested, engaged, having a strong involvement in the teaching so that we don't kind of waste our own time in the presence of a teacher, but also make good use of what they are offering to us through our own interest. So this is something we have to continually be doing. This is part of our practice in the Bodhisattva path of what we call joyous effort, enthusiasm. Kind of keep the energy going so that we can make sure that we make the best use of that relationship. And then recall that Chandrakirti, in his commentary, states commentary on Aryadeva's text that the quote came from. He states that first, respect for the Dharma and the expounder of the Dharma, and second, an attentive mind are added so that 5 characteristics are set forth. We left off right there. We kind of went through those 5, and I think those are pretty self-explanatory, the last 2. So there's a way of summarizing these that Lama Tsongkhapa gives in this next part. That being so, we can categorize this into 4. He's going to condense it essentially into 4. Strong interest in the Dharma, a fully attentive mind while listening, great respect for the Dharma and the expounder of Dharma, and holding to good explanations and rejecting faulty ones. So he says intelligence is a conducive circumstance for those 4. So essentially, we need our intelligence, our discrimination, to engage in, increasing those qualities within ourselves and to engaging in our teachings we receive from the teacher and what have you. All of that intelligence is a part of it. And impartiality, he says, is what eliminates adverse circumstances. So if we are able to block off some of those biases and what have you, then we receive the teachings in that pure way, and we're able to make good use of that relationship. So then it says, examine whether all the qualities that would make you suitable to be guided by a guru are complete, and cultivate joy if they are, but if they're not complete, strive to create the causes for their completion before your life is over. In other words, as soon as possible, we want to make sure that we have those qualities and that we are engaging in a healthy relationship with the guru, with having those informing that relationship. So we'll see if there are questions at the end. Let me go forward with the topic for tonight, which is really the initial one is the way to rely. By rely, we mean what is the best way to get the most out of that relationship? We've already talked about kind of the qualities we want to have, but what are the activities we need to engage in? And we're going to see this divided into essentially two main topics. The way to rely in terms of our thoughts, the thoughts that we want to have that really create the ideal relationship with that guru, but then the actions we engage in towards them as well as on our own that are a reflection of our respect for the guru and our ability to follow the advice of the guru and so on. So this is essentially where we're going for the main part of tonight, is to really look at these two. And keep in mind that the middle length Lamrim is a much more condensed presentation of some of these topics than what we see in the Great Treatise. And you're certainly welcome. That whole list of books is on the reading list that you're welcome to follow additional readings and see how things are expanded. I'll point out a few things tonight that are, I think, kind of important to point out in regard to the difference between the teachings here in the middle length Lamrim and what we see in some of the other Lamrim texts. So it says here then, thus, in someone endowed with the characteristics of a suitable vessel, a good disciple, should examine, as explained above, whether a teacher has the necessary characteristics, and if so, receive the kindness of the Dharma from them. As for the way to rely on a spiritual teacher from whom in general you receive the kindness of the Dharma, and who in particular guides your mind well by means of perfectly complete instructions, there are 2 points: the way to rely in thought and the way to rely through actions. So in terms of thought, there are 2 additional subsections to this. This has 2 points: the root thought, which is training in faith, and I'll explain what that is referring to shortly. And then secondly, remembering the guru's kindness so as to generate respect. So this word faith, we use faith in Buddhism. It's one of our, we'll see when we have the basic program course around minds and mental factors, it's one of the virtuous mental factors. But faith, I want to point out, most of you may know this already, but it has a slightly different connotation, maybe a pretty different connotation than what we mean by faith in some of the theistic traditions, where my experience, at least, is that faith does involve, yes, some experiential component, but there's often a leap of faith, often something where we are having faith in something we can't necessarily know ourselves or prove ourselves. In Buddhism, there are said to be 3 levels of faith. I'm not going to go into all the detail of that, but what's important is that we're driving our faith towards having kind of reasoned conviction, a conviction in what we are engaging in through reasoning, through analysis, through some understanding. It's not blind faith, in other words. Faith in Buddhism, it generates greater and greater as we gain more and more experience with the Dharma. And our faith, when we start out, might be just a bit like blind faith, a little, they call it clear faith, where we're beginning to see some of the clarity of what the Buddha's teachings and admiring it to some degree. And then we engage in developing greater belief and conviction and so on. All of that arises on the basis of that initial spark. But if it doesn't get to a point where we have some reasoned conviction in the teachings, then it doesn't really sustain itself. Some people may be practitioners that are okay with hanging out in that, more traditional faith-based kind of approach. But really, the whole point is that we have to taste these teachings for ourselves. And this is what the Buddha, again, we saw that quote when we were looking at the topic of how to listen to and explain the Dharma, that the Buddhas can't plant their realizations in our heads. Just having a faith in the Buddha is a wonderful thing, but the Buddhas can't do what we would ideally like them to do, which is get rid of all my garbage and give me all the good stuff. We have to practice the Dharma that the Buddhas are giving us. And of course, that our gurus, our teachers are giving us. So essentially, when we mean faith here, we're talking about a level of conviction, and in particular around the guru being an embodiment of that enlightened energy, essentially being a Buddha. We're going to go into some of the additional teachings that are given in some of the other texts, because I do think they're important to touch on in a moment. But this is the main thought that we are working with here, training in faith in our gurus as being like a Buddha, or at least, sort of a messenger of the Buddhas, maybe being an actual Buddha if we can get to that level. So there's a quote first to begin with from the Jules Blaise Dorani, which says, "Faith, a preliminary practice, gives birth like a mother to all good qualities, guards them, and makes them increase." So we see that faith is actually the root from which all of our other qualities arise. And faith in the Guru, as we saw when we looked at that first verse of the foundation of all good qualities in last week, is what faith in the Guru and having that conviction and attention to the Guru produces all of our good qualities. As it says here, this says that faith gives birth to excellent qualities that have not yet arisen, and once they have come into existence, it maintains and increases them. So again, this is the idea behind having this faith in our gurus that will kind of keep us moving in that direction, keep us having the influence of these guides, inspiring us, guiding us, helping us to generate the qualities that they want us to generate in ourselves. You know, this is what our gurus all want for us, is they want us to develop our minds and to practice the path. So having a faith and conviction in them, especially to see them as a Buddha, is a very profound practice. Now, in terms of this idea of seeing the gurus as a Buddha, I do have to mention before we get into this too far that it's always, traditionally, it seems to be set out in terms of this is not a requirement until you get to the tantric level. Seeing the guru as a Buddha is essential to Tantra. We're not going to talk about Tantra so much in this, course on the stages of the path because of it being primarily a sutra presentation. But when you engage in Tantric empowerment, you are holding that view that you are receiving empowerment from that Buddha, that you're being empowered to practice the means of accomplishment of that figure. So you essentially have to hold that pure view. You have to see your guru as a Buddha. Whoever is conveying, transmitting that empowerment has to be seen in that light. However, it seems like over time, and particularly in Lama Tsongkhapa's approach, and certainly all of our teachers, Lama Zopa Rinpoche and so on, really do emphasize the idea that nonetheless, even in our sutra approach to the Dharma and to reliance upon a spiritual guide, we should ideally hold this view. And it's going to make some sense when we look at all of the little reasoning that's given. It's not in our text. It's found primarily in Pabunkar Rinpoche's text, but I'll put that on the screen and we'll talk about it a bit shortly. But let's go ahead and see what Lama Tsongkhapa says in the middle length Lamrim around this topic of, the faith in the Guru, particularly the faith in the Guru being a Buddha. Goes on to quote from the Ten Dharmas Sutra, which says, "Faith is the foremost vehicle leading to definite release. For that reason, the intelligent rely on the pursuit of faith. In those lacking faith, virtuous phenomena do not arise. Just as in seeds burnt by fire, no green sprout can germinate." So it seems like from this quote that without faith is kind of the root and the real essence of our practice of the Dharma, we're not going to necessarily get very far because it'll be like a burnt seed that can never germinate. So again, we are going to look at the drawbacks of not properly relying on the gurus, but we do see that already here we're being presented with some of the disadvantages if we don't really hold this kind of view of the gurus as best as possible. As I said, it's primarily within the tantric teachings, but we can begin to practice that now with the gurus that we do have, those that we are in that type of relationship with. This is not a general instruction for all levels of teachers. You can practice it at that level if you wish, but just keep in mind this is primarily an instruction for you when you're in a guru-disciple relationship in terms of what faith you need to have in that being who's playing that particular role in your spiritual development. So it says there next, in terms of what is gained when it is present and what is lost in its absence, faith is said to be the foundation of all excellent qualities. Generally speaking, there are many types of faith. Because again, faith is something we see in many aspects of the Buddha's teachings. Faith in the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We're going to see refuge and faith in the three jewels coming up in the part 2 of this series on stages of the path. In karmic cause and effect, karma will be a topic we also discuss in that second part. We can have faith in karma there. Faith in the Four Noble Truths. That's something we, again, generate a conviction around when we examine the Four Noble Truths. That will also be explained and meditated on as part of the second part of this course. Here, however, it is faith in the Guru. Furthermore, as for the way to see the Guru, the Tantra bestowing the initiation of Vajrapani, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, says, O Lord of Secrets, how should a student see their master? Just like they would see the Buddha, the Blessed One. And there are these quotes. Lord of Secrets is referring to, I believe, Vajrapani, but essentially it's from a Tantra. And it's, again, particularly in Tantra, as I said, where this sort of instruction is given, where one needs to see one's Guru as the Buddha, see them just like you would see the Buddha. It says here similar statements can be found in the collection of Mahayana Sutras and in the Vinaya. Their meaning is this, and I highlighted it because I think it is important to really, get what is being said here. If you understand that someone is like a Buddha, a mind finding fault with them will not arise, and a mind contemplating their excellent qualities will arise. Likewise, with regard to a guru, eliminate any concept of fault in every respect and train the mind that conceives excellent qualities. It's kind of interesting. Alex Berzin, I mentioned last week, his book, Wise Teacher, Wise Student. He kind of approaches it from a Western point of view, as a Western student, which he is as well, American, who lives in Germany now, but he's had many years of contact with great gurus. And he kind of phrases it in this way. It's not that we don't have any awareness of the faults of a guru, because that is the whole part of them appearing in the form of a guru. They're a being that is just like us, that's going to have faults, that's going to do things that may seem inappropriate at times. Hopefully nothing horribly inappropriate. That's a whole nother scenario that we hopefully don't have to deal with. But if they do things, we don't focus on those. He uses the analogy of like if you're in a ground level building, maybe like a library or something, and there's a window where people walk by. Well, you see somebody walk by and you just see the top part of them, right? That's all that you can see. That's what you want to, where your perception is. But it doesn't mean they don't have legs beneath that. What you see that's walking by the window is just the top part of their body. He uses that as an analogy for how we should be working with our gurus. We want to see the top part. We want to focus on the qualities, focus on what we can easily discern as the good things that are excellent qualities in that guide, so that that becomes what leads us, what guides us. Doesn't mean that we ignore and don't think that there's something underneath that. Just we're not going to focus there. I mean, we know this in our personal relationships, right? If you are getting to know somebody and initially you might see good qualities and then you start seeing faults over time, if your mind starts to focus too much on the faults, then you eventually want nothing to do with that person. Whereas you become blinder and blinder to the qualities as you perceive those faults. So it's just kind of logic in terms of how we want to work with this. But because we're working with this particular paradigm of seeing the guru as a Buddha, it's essential that we really focus on those qualities. Now, what I've got in a little footnote there that I didn't click on before is essentially what we're going to talk about next, which is, as it says there, traditionally there are 4 reasons set out as to why we can see our guru as a Buddha. So let's go ahead and go to those. Whoops, I didn't mean to click on that. Let me pull up the slides. I don't know if I had another slide before this. Sometimes I do this, as you probably have figured out. And by the way, I want to apologize. I'm not getting the slides up as timely as I would like to. I'm going to try to correct that. I just have been very busy lately. And I'm going to do my best to get the questions, as I said, on Monday at least. I'll have questions out there. And then by Wednesday, midday or so, I'll have the answers to the questions. But yeah, this is where my slides are starting for tonight. These are what are often called the 4 reasons why we can see our guru as a Buddha. Now, I might mention that Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in his book of teachings on this topic, which is called The Heart of the Path, which if you haven't encountered and read, I strongly encourage it. The subtitle is Seeing the Guru as Buddha. And it's amazing teachings and edited extremely well. I really like that. It's one of the best publications out of Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives. Again, if you need any more advice on how to obtain that, you can go to lamayeshe.com, and actually most of the book is right there online. You can read it. If you want to get a PDF or a Mobi or whatever copy of it, you can do that very easily. So the 4 reasons start with, and they're set in a reverse order here. Normally they start with number 4 as they're presented, which is that Vajradhara, which is the tantric form of the Buddha, stated that the guru is a Buddha. Well, for most of us in the West, we don't have this immediate kind of conviction in something simply because a scripture says it, simply because, in this case, a tantra that the Buddha taught says that in the future, this holy being, this Buddha, will appear in the form of gurus, in the form of spiritual teachers. That's a nice, complement to what we're going through. We need more reasoning behind this. That's why Lama Zopa Rinpoche says he prefers switching the order. So we actually work with the last of the reasons that is traditionally set out first. So let's look at that reason. There is nothing to trust in our own view. Sometimes this is kind of worded as we cannot trust our own appearance. There's a whole thing down around karmic appearances, as well as the fact that even a lot of what we encounter is distorted in terms of the way that things appear to exist on their own intrinsically, which we'll be looking at and examining as part of the teachings on emptiness way further on in this course. But there are false appearances all around us. And things that appear karmically in one way to us might appear karmically very different for others. Here's a story of a Sangha when he was meditating, trying to induce a vision of his guru, Maitreya. And the story goes, I'm going to cut it really, really short, otherwise you could go on for quite some time. He meditated for 3 years at a time, and each time he came out and still had not received this vision of his guru. And he did that 4 times. So it was 12 years in meditation in this cave. And he was finally pretty disgusted with not getting a vision of his guru from all of his meditation. So he went down to the village to refresh himself and what have you. And there he saw a dog that was lying on the ground that had a really horrible wound, open wound on its backside. And there were maggots in it and what have you. It was really quite nasty. And his heart just broke seeing this dog. And he wanted to help the dog. And he knew that he could maybe, find a way to, relieve the suffering by doctoring that area and what have you, but there were maggots on it. And so he knew that he had to remove the maggots. So it said that he actually removed a portion of his own flesh with the preparation that he would then remove the maggots and put them on his own flesh so that they wouldn't be harmed either. Well, he is doing all this, but then he realizes, how is he going to pick up these maggots? He'll kill them potentially if he squeezes them with his finger. So he decides he needs to use his tongue to do this. So it said that he's kind of leaning over and he's sort of disgusted at this to some degree, but so compassionate towards this dog and towards the maggots. He's got his tongue out, and then there's no dog there. He looks up, and there's Maitreya appearing to him. Now, again, this story, is it mythology? Is it a real story? I don't know. It's told often to convey that idea that when his karma was purified enough, he first, saw the dog, which was this drawing him into having that act of compassion. That was the final thing that got him across the line. And then upon his compassionate response to that dog, his guru appeared, Maitreya appeared. Maitreya took him on this amazing journey where he received the transmission of the 5 texts of Maitreya that are primarily known. Anyway, the whole point is that we have the karma to see what we have the karma to see. So if something is appearing to you in a particular form, that is your karma. It can be purified. I mentioned this prior, I think last week, that Lama Tsongkhapa received teachings from his guru in the form of Manjushri. You can get your mind purified to a point where you are experiencing a much purer view. The point of all this is back to reason number 1. We can't trust our appearances. Somebody may appear to us as just like a homeless person on the street, right? And they could be an enlightened being for all we know. We don't know. And this goes for everybody, really. I mean, we can make some assessment on the basis of what we see them engaging in and doing, but we don't know for sure that even somebody who's engaged in the most horrible acts in this world is, truly a despicable sentient being rather than a Buddha. We shouldn't make them sound like they're inherently despicable. In this life, they might be engaging those actions. Even if they're a sentient being under the control of those, they have Buddha nature. But we don't know the status of any being around us. The whole point of this is to begin to question our appearances. Not that we, think nothing is real out there and then we don't trust anything. We just act in response to the world with that understanding that our appearances could be very distorted. And somebody who is appearing to be something very different. There's stories around many of these disciples finding their guru. Like Naropa, when he first came to Tilopa, he was told to go seek out this guru. And Tilopa was down by the riverside catching fish and throwing them live onto the fire. And Naropa's like, what is this? I'm not going to follow this being. This was all part of Naropa's distorted karma that was coming into fruition to see that, to purify some things. And he ended up getting curious enough to go over there and see what was going on. And actually, Tilopa was said to be liberating these beings rather than throwing them on a burning fire. But this was Naropa's karmic appearance. Tilopa was an amazing guru for him. We don't know, again, and I'm not saying we're all going to have these mystical experiences at some point. We probably will, though. Maybe not in this lifetime. But we have to begin to question. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you'll see more on this topic if you go to Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand or Liberation in Our Hands, either of those two translations of Pabanka Rinpoche's commentary on the Lamrim. Secondly, and thirdly, these two kind of go together in my mind. Even nowadays, meaning even at the present time, all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are still working for sentient beings, especially the Buddhas. These beings are dedicated through the force of their bodhicitta to being of compassionate service to sentient beings. That's what we are on the path of trying to accomplish ourselves. These beings are not going to like check out. They become a Buddha or they get on the bodhisattva path and they stop working for sentient beings. That would be absurd because they practice, those who have attained Buddhahood, they practice the entire path motivated by bodhicitta, motivated by the wish to benefit sentient beings, to do whatever they can to lead them to enlightenment. So if they attain that state, they're not going to check out then. They're not going to say, oh, well, that was just to get me to Buddhahood. I'm not going to work for the sake of sentient beings now. Of course they're working for sentient beings. And bodhisattvas who are on their way to achieving that are also working for sentient beings. Well, we might start in this practice by thinking, well, maybe my guru is at least a bodhisattva, maybe at least a being who has this spontaneous bodhicitta, uncontrived mind, and is on that learning path moving towards enlightenment. But ideally, they're a being who is fully developed, who has gone through that whole process and is imbued with that great compassion and great love for all beings and is acting for their welfare every single moment. Because that's what we mean by a Buddha. That's the job description of a Buddha, enlighten all beings. That's it. That's what they do with that enlightened mind that they've created. That's what we are aspiring to do when we generate bodhicitta motivation. The third one is if we look at it, we see that actually the guru, and this time again, it's particularly those beings that we have chosen to see in that relationship of a disciple to them being our guru, our spiritual mentor, our guide. They're the doer, the agent of all the Buddha's actions. So when it comes down to it, we're seeing that the things that Buddhas would do or bodhisattvas would do are what our gurus are doing. I mean, it would be lovely if our political leaders and our corporate heads and everyone else in the world who's engaged in more mundane, endeavors, that those were Buddhas. Maybe they are. I don't know. Again, I can't tell. I'm not blocked to that appearance, but nonetheless, it's more likely that we're going to find Buddhas in this world doing the same sorts of things that our gurus are doing, giving Mahayana teachings, giving tantric empowerment, guiding disciples slowly and slowly on the path, gradually helping them to ripen their minds. Those are the sorts of things, again, that Buddhists do. So again, if the Buddhas are still active in the world and the gurus are doing the actions of the Buddha, it sounds kind of likely to me that those could be Buddhas appearing in that form. And with some beings, maybe we don't have such a difficult time. When we see someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, some of our other great masters, men and women who have manifested in this world with really quite amazing qualities, we might be able to hold that view. But the idea here is that whoever we are going to have that karma to be with, to be the disciple of, whoever plays that role, this is the ideal position to put ourselves in and to hold in regard to the view that we have of them. It really creates the optimal way for our spiritual development to happen. Now, once more, it doesn't mean that you're blind to the faults. We're going to see this coming up back in our text. It means you're cognizant of them, but you're going to choose to focus on the qualities. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when he would teach, he would say, it's inevitable that we're going to see faults in our gurus. Why? Because that's our karmic appearance. It's our karma to have them appearing, Buddhas appearing in an ordinary form. Being in ordinary form means you're going to have ordinary faults. Like, even just the fault of having a body like ours that gets sick, that ages, and so on, that eventually dies. All of that is a karmic product of what we are receiving teachings, the form we are receiving teachings in. It's all part and parcel of that package. We're going to get Buddhas coming in and teaching us in a human form. That means that with that karma that we have, they're going to go through all of the human changes that we do. You know? Lama Zopa Rinpoche would also frequently say, we're so fortunate that the gurus aren't, or the Buddhas aren't appearing to us in the form of like our dogs or animals, because then they'd just be barking at us or doing things, getting on our lap and what have you, and we wouldn't be able to receive teachings at all because it's not in a form that we can actually be receiving those teachings and benefit from that. Whereas we have the good fortune for the Buddhas to appear in a human form. And some pretty amazing human forms when it comes down to it. These beings like His Holiness and so on that have an amazing presence in our world and that we can learn from. So again, I'm not pointing out them as just being, if you don't have a guru at that level, well, then it's a problem. Gurus are whoever you, again, choose on the basis of your own investigation and that you want to enter into that relationship with on the basis of a number of other criteria, such as, taking vows, tantric empowerment, and so on, as well as just from your side, seeing them as your guru. And once you've made that commitment, the ideal thing is to try to hold that view to say, I'm going to try this on. And when I get to tantric empowerment, then certainly I have to have that view of this being who is now empowering me into that practice being the same essence as that Buddha that I'm being empowered into the practice of doing. So that's the idea behind this. And again, I think most of you have heard this. We end up in Rinpoche's presentation with the very first one in the Lamrim texts of like Pabanka and what have you, which is that Vajradhara stated the Guru is a Buddha. Well, again, that's nice that Vajradhara stated that, but I think the other three reasons give us some rationale. To me, it makes complete sense. We're completing the circuit. If you have beings like ourselves that were dedicated to becoming a Buddha, well, they want to be able to benefit sentient beings like us. How are they doing that? They're doing that by appearing in the form of these beings, human beings like us, who can impart the Dharma to us. Okay. So that's, I think, all I wanted to share on that. Let's go back to our text because, again, I just felt like it was important that I do spend a little bit of time on that at least so that we have a grounding in those reasonings because they're really not set out in this text at all. And even in the Lamrim Chenmo, they're kind of there a little bit indirectly, but not quite as clearly as they're spelled out in Pabanka Rinpoche's Liberation. The above Tantra also says, right in the middle of the screen there, apprehend your master's excellent qualities. Do not apprehend their faults. Apprehending their qualities will gain you siddhis. Siddhis are the attainments, the common attainments that can be attained by even practitioners sometimes outside of Buddhism, but the great attainment, the uncommon attainment, siddhi of Buddhahood. Apprehending their faults will block the attainment of those siddhis. You should act accordingly. Thus, if excellent qualities predominate in your guru, but you think about them in terms of the few faults they have, this will become an obstacle to your own siddhis, your own attainments. And even if faults predominate, and this is the thing I was mentioning earlier, even if you do see primarily faults, if you train in faith from the perspective of their excellent qualities, without thinking about them in terms of their flaws, this will cause siddhis to arise. You will get the attainments. When it comes to your own guru, whether their flaws are great or small, contemplate the faults of thinking about them in those terms. Repeatedly generate a mind to eliminate, these erroneous kind of attention to the faults and so on, and make it stop. So this is really, again, something that's up to us. From the side of the guru, if that is a fully enlightened being, well, then there are no faults. The faults that are appearing are a manifestation of our own karma. And we work with that understanding. If by chance the person that we are investing this relationship of guru, if they are not an enlightened being, Well, then it's still our job to focus on the qualities, to not get caught up in the faults, so that there's a weakening of our faith and a weakening of our commitment to following the advice of that being. Because once we start having that weakening, well, then all these other things come into play. We're going to see that being spelled out in our text as well. We don't want to end up following, faulty beings and what have you, and, being subject to misleading teachings. We want to keep our, commitment to the guru very solid. If concepts of faults arise due to carelessness, acute afflictions, and so forth, well, apply yourself to confession and restraint. Purify those negativities. We'll talk about purification more when we get to the topic of karma in part two. But we'll even touch on it in regard to the seven limbs that are coming up in the meditation practice advice. But we have to kind of make sure that we overcome those faults and try to hold that pure view. Goes on to say, if you familiarize yourself with these antidotes accordingly, you may see that there are a few faults, but since your mind focuses on excellent qualities, it will not become an obstacle to your faith. For instance, Atisha himself, who again was the author of the Lamrim through his lamp for the path to enlightenment, he upheld the view of the Madhyamaka, the middle way, which is the supreme view that the Buddha taught. While Sir Lingpa, who I mentioned previously, his great guru from Indonesia, Sumatra, he upheld the view of the true aspectarian Chittamatra, the mind-only school. One of its branches is called the true aspectarian, the other is the false aspectarian. But essentially, it was a lower tenet system. The middle way is said to be the highest. Mind-only is like the next rung below, but it's not the final view that the Buddha taught. And he says, which is why, in terms of view, one guru was higher than the other. Lama Atisha was higher in terms of his view than his guru, Sir Limpa. However, as Atisha discovered the general stages of the Mahayana path and bodhicitta, relying on Sir Limpa, he regarded him as peerless among spiritual teachers. Remember, I said he was one of his root gurus. So again, this idea of like the qualities that a guru may have don't need to be the focus of all your attention. And if they do become the focus of it, then you bring them down a rung in a sense. You lower them in relation to yourself. Atisha was able to see Sir Lingpa as peerless, as this amazing being, regardless of the view he held in terms of philosophy, in terms of the wisdom teachings. That's the entire presentation of the working with faith, training in faith. The very bottom of the screen there, we see remembering his kindness or their kindness, the guru's kindness, so as to generate respect. So what I have as a little note on this is that some texts actually do set out 4 points within this topic, and I might go through those really quickly before we come back. The way it's set out in our text, it's just like some quotes and things. There's not even really much commentary from Tsongkhapa on this. In Pabanka Rinpoche's text, Liberation, he does go into 4 different subdivisions, and you're welcome. I'm not going to talk about these really a lot, but you're welcome to go to those texts and read more, and those may help influence your way of meditating on this topic of generating respect for the Guru by thinking about the Guru's amazing kindness. So in that text, Pabanka Rinpoche says, as taught in the oral tradition of Kutsang Jamyang Monlam and his spiritual sons, this second subsection has 4 parts, when we're remembering the kindness. First, that the Guru is more kind than the Buddhas. The Guru is the one appearing for us. The Buddhas are out there and they're doing that work, all the various Buddha figures that have appeared in the past. Whatever the Buddha that's manifesting for us in the form of the Guru is kinder than them because they're doing that for us. They're in our lives in that way, helping us to break out of our patterns of negative thinking and actions and what have you. Their kindness of teaching Dharma, that this is what they are doing for us, without a doubt. Our Gurus are giving us the teachings of the Dharma, the medicine that we need to have in order to attain liberation and enlightenment. Their kindness of blessing our minds. They say this is one of the less tangible things that we see is the inspiration, the blessing we receive from the Gurus, which through being devoted and dedicated to them does ripen into the attainment of good qualities and so on, as we just saw in that earlier section. And then lastly, their kindness of supporting followers with material needs. Maybe we don't see this as much in the West, but certainly in more traditional Eastern ways of approaching things, there has tended to be a strong kind of material support that is given by gurus. Lama Zopa Rinpoche himself, had an amazing way of paying attention to those beings who needed support and who he saw as kind of in the wake of his teachings and what have you, the monks at Sarajay Monastery and so on, that he did whatever he could to help make sure they had food every day, and then eventually developed a fund that is perpetual, that through the investments it will continue to make sure that the monks always have food and are always taken care of and so on at Sarajay Monastery. So again, all these sorts of things, we may not be the recipient of those kinds of material needs quite so much in our day and age, but we know the other three kindnesses are happening all the time, right? And whenever we're in the presence of our guru, some sort of teaching, even if they're not giving a formal teaching, they're giving us some type of teaching. So again, you're welcome to go to those texts and to reflect on the way it's set out there. In our text, as I said, it's just some really inspiring and wonderful verses, but we start off with the 10 Dharmas Sutra, which says, they look for me who has roamed in psychic existence for a long time. They awaken me from enduring obscuration and torpor owing to ignorance. They pull me out as I sink in the ocean of existence. They show good paths to me who has entered bad ones. They free me who has been bound in the prison of existence. They are a doctor to me who is long tormented by illness. They are the rain clouds drenching me who has been ablaze with the fires of attachment and the rest. I don't think I need to comment on all of these. I mean, there definitely are, meanings behind all of these analogies that are used, right? Sinking in the ocean of existence, they're pulling us out, what have you. I think it's pretty clear, but the gurus are playing this role for us. They are the ones who are attentive to us continually. I don't think there's a moment, obviously, with the Buddhists, there's no moment when we're outside the purview of their compassion and concern and regard. And with our gurus, it's the same. We are, always the object of their desire to benefit us. Once more, it depends upon our remembering that kindness and having the great respect for them that we ideally should have. The Marvelous Array Sutra also says, these are my spiritual friends, expounders of Dharma, exhaustively teaching the qualities of all phenomena, thoroughly teaching the conduct of bodhisattvas. With these thoughts in mind, I have come here. As they give birth to all of this, they are like my mother, because again, they kind of give birth to the Dharma arising in our minds. They pour forth the milk of virtues, hence they are like wet nurses. They cause that to continue and grow and develop, so our excellent qualities continue to expand and increase. They train me thoroughly in the branches of enlightenment, all the various things we need to achieve the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, all the other branches of enlightenment that are a part of attaining that state. These spiritual friends completely turn away harm, the harm that we might have to encounter on the basis of our negative actions, that they guide us away from. They are like doctors that release from aging and death. Like Lord Indra, they shower rains of nectar. Apparently, Indra is the god who helps to keep the rains and the water in our world so that we can have that kind of um, uh, the effects of that water on our crops and just our well-being and what have you. Like the full moon, they enhance the white qualities. Like bright sunlight, they show the way to peace in the way that sunlight dispels darkness and so on. Regarding friends and foes, they are stable like mountains, their minds as undisturbed as the depths of the sea. They give perfect support. Some say, like boatmen or boats people, that the captains and so on of ships that give the perfect support to take us to the other shore. With this in mind, I, Sudana, have come here. By the way, in reading this through, I was recalled that one thing I meant to mention earlier on, but of course it would have been last week, was that at the very beginning of the Lamrim Chenmo, there's actually the uh, nine, what is it called? Can't remember the noun for it. The 9 ways of relating to the spiritual teacher, the 9 kind of attitudes. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Venerable Tundra. I couldn't get that word in my head for some reason. The nine attitudes. I'll put the text out there on the materials. Try to remember to do that later tonight. But the nine attitudes of serving a spiritual guru that kind of come into play involve those kinds of things in terms of how we want to see ourselves in response to the gurus. One of them is to be like a dog, that even though the dog might get beaten or yelled at or something, we go back to the master. We don't have that kind of mind of resentment and so on. But these are ways of training our minds. And anyway, I was reminded of that by looking at these other analogies for the gurus. But we want to have a similar mind of, doing whatever we can to, out of the kindness of our gurus, to serve them and so on. We're going to see that coming up when we get to devoting or relating to the guru, relying upon the guru in terms of our actions. The very bottom of the screen there, these bodhisattvas bring forth my understanding. They cause the enlightenment of Buddha's children. These beings, these friends of mine, are praised by the Buddha. With such virtuous thoughts, I have come here. As they save the world, they are like heroes. They have become the captains, protectors, and refuge. They are the I bestowing happiness on me, kind of the wisdom I that helps me to achieve, full happiness. With thoughts like these, I honor my spiritual friends. So again, what does this all mean? The last part of it, recollect the sentiments expressed here by using a tune to go with the verses, aspiring to take the part of Sudana yourself, who is praising his spiritual teachers. But the idea is that when we talk about this topic of generating an awareness, a regard for the kindness of our gurus, and then having respect for them, means to reflect on all the ways that the gurus are incredibly kind. All the things that you received through the kindness of those teachers, and try to generate that type of respect, to see them in that light as being of incredible benefit on our spiritual path. I know in the West we like to think of this sort of DIY sort of mentality that, Lone Ranger, we can all do it ourselves. We're not going to need to rely upon anyone else. And many of us feel like we have that model of the self-made person or something in our culture. But there's no such thing, really. I mean, we all have benefited from the kindness of others. When it comes to our spiritual path, where, as I mentioned last week, we need a guru, we need someone to direct us because we've never embarked on that path and made it to the destination, right? We may have had encounters with it and maybe been interested but lost interest or whatever. If we want to go the full distance, we have to rely upon someone who has already traversed that path, or at least can give us guidance, for as far as they have attained. But the idea here, again, is that when we see that kindness of somebody pointing the way for us, helping us to find the path and practice it purely, well, how amazing, how wonderful, how respectful we should be towards that being who is doing that for us. Okay, so that's the idea behind that. Don't need to say too much more about that. Let's go on to the second main topic here. We had relying through thoughts, which was again training in faith, and then having this kind of a recollection of the kindness of the gurus, and then generating respect. Those were the two topics within that. Now we go on to how to rely through actions. There's this wonderful text by Aryasura, I think, the 50 verses on the Guru. And in two of those verses, they're repeated here. What need is there for many words here? Do everything to make your Guru happy. Abandon everything they are displeased with. Apply yourself to that. Examine that. This was said by Vajradhara himself, again, that tantric form of Buddha Shakyamuni that appeared to disseminate the tantras. Spiritual attainments follow the guru. Aware of this, use everything there is and make your guru absolutely happy. And again, it's this whole mentality that we're going to see in this section. I want to just make a comment or two. It's not that the gurus want or need all those things from us, right? Like if we're talking about doing things that will please them, making monetary offerings to them, or taking them places, what have you, all these kinds of things that you can do for your teachers. They're not in the business of getting those things. That's not what our gurus are doing. Our gurus are trying to help us on our path of awakening. That's what they're dedicated to. We're going to see that the third of these ways of dedicating ourselves to the guru in terms of actions is the most wonderful, the main one, which is following what the guru teaches. That's what the gurus want. They want us to change our minds, to follow in the path that they have already traversed. So that's the main thing that the gurus want. It's not that our gurus are money hungry or need homes in various parts of the world or something. Many people will make those kinds of offerings to our gurus. I mean, there are many homes that were offered to Lama Zopa Rinpoche in the course of his years in being our spiritual director that were intended to be holy places for him to come and to be able to do practice and what have you. They were not, something that Rinpoche asked for. They weren't something that Rinpoche necessarily wanted or needed. They were an offering from the heart of those disciples. So again, this is how we should be treating these ways of devoting ourselves in action, is thinking that it's from our side, wanting to please the guru, but from the side of the guru, they're totally happy doing what they're doing. So don't think that, again, if you have teachers that are demonstrating that aspect of like wanting things, I think that's a bit of a red flag. I don't know. I don't want to criticize anybody, but I think we see in these teachings that these are, pure motivations from the side of our gurus. What we have to do from here is practice with the right attitude ourselves in terms of our actions. So then it says there, in brief, try hard to please the guru and to eliminate whatever they do not like. So the three means of pleasing the guru are, first, offering them material things, which can include, just any monetary offering or flowers or, food or whatever it is. If you can offer a home or something that huge, that's wonderful, right? But offering material things is an extension of your act of giving in response to the kindness of the teacher. Serving them and paying them respect with body and speech. We're going to talk a little bit about what this means, and some of the examples, might not necessarily apply in regard to an individual relationship we might have with a guru, but any way that we serve teachers. Many teachers need people to, for example, transcribe their teachings. We have a whole array of teachings here at Thupten Norbuling that Geshe Thupten Sherab has given. A wonderful way to serve that teacher would be to listen to those teachings, transcribe them, maybe put them into a publication, so that you're allowing that teacher's teachings to go further in the world and to be a benefit to others. Those are the sorts of things that would be really a wonderful way to serve gurus, but there are many ways you can do that. Practicing in accord with the guru's advice, as I said, this is the main one. This is what the gurus really want in essence. And of course, they teach out of that motivation. They want us to change our minds, to follow the advice. In this regard, ornament for the Mahayana Sutras, again, the same text that we had the quote on the guru's qualities from the text by Maitreya. It says, through homage, offerings purely obtained, and service and practice, you should rely on a spiritual friend. So these are all mentioned in that verse. So as for the first, in 50 verses on the Guru, again, Arya Shura's text, if through things not typically given, your children, your spouse, and even your life, you should always rely, how did I do that? I hit the wrong thing here somehow. Sorry about that. And it looked like it stopped the share, but I may not have actually stopped it. Sorry. Okay, so you should always rely on the master of your commitments. Then, needless to say, you should through fleeting possessions. You should through fleeting possessions. That sounds a little strange to me, but maybe I go back to the other part of it. If through things not typically given, you should always rely on the master of your commitments. And needless to say, you should rely through fleeting possessions. So again, there are these stories about people who gave kind of those sorts of possessions, family members or what have you, but it was more symbolic than it was like, it's not anything, harmful in that regard. What we're trying to do here, though, is to train our minds to be free with our possessions, to really think that we want to do what we can to benefit. If, for example, there's a project that our gurus have that they are, really feeling they would like to further and see come to fruition, and we can make a monetary offering, or maybe we can offer a service, provide some sort of, physical work or whatever on that project that needs to be done, office work, whatever, we try to do those because we recognize that the guru's wishes are very important for us to attend to. So again, giving time, giving, the resources, All of this is part of this, generosity. Obviously, when we serve the gurus, we're also giving our time and whatever talents and things that we can do. Continuing there in verse 21 of that same text. Whoops, sorry, what did I do there? Okay. Did I hit pause? No. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting used to this still. Sometimes, and especially with Kindle, it's weird because I have to move it around in order to see my screen, my little menu that you all can't see. Anyway, giving to your guru amounts to always offering gifts to all the Buddhas. Such offering accumulates merit. That in turn leads to the highest siddhi. So the idea is here when we give to the gurus, we're in essence giving to the Buddhas. And certainly if we hold that view that our gurus are Buddhas, well, that's without a doubt giving to a Buddha. But we're essentially giving to all the Buddhas. The guru is said to be, we're going to see this coming up when we get to the teachings on karma. Many of you have had teachings in terms of the things that make karma more powerful. One of them is the object of those karmic actions. And in terms of positive actions, such as generosity and so on, the highest object we can have is the guru, higher than the Buddhas. Buddhas and bodhisattvas are in the chain. They're definitely like right below the guru, but the guru is the highest object because the guru is the one we have that personal relationship with. They're the ones that we are learning from and engaging in their practices that they're assigning to us and the tantric empowerments they're giving us and so on. They're the lifeline for us. They're the ones that are keeping us connected to this living tradition. And so they play a very important role. They're the most powerful object. So when we give or do any of these actions towards the guru, then we are definitely kind of, in the best possible position to benefit from all of that. So anyway, let's go on then to the second of these. The first one, again, mainly primarily around giving material things, but to some degree even giving our time, what have you, services. But the second one is more about those ways that we serve the guru. The second is, and they use examples here, which again may not be something we might be privy to doing because these might be more like attendants that need to attend to the body of the guru and what have you, like those that were attending to Rinpoche and so on. Bathing, anointing, massaging, wrapping up, cleaning, nursing when they're ill, so forth. And sort of also talking about their excellent qualities, being kind of that person who is an emissary of that guru and helping them and, to have that in the world and what have you. But the things that are pointed out here, again, in our modern day world and in terms of what often happens with relationships with our gurus is that oftentimes we don't see the gurus as frequently. We're not living with them and in the presence of them where we can offer them those sorts of things, right? So instead, we do what we can from a distance to serve them, as I said, helping them to have their teachings published, to edit transcripts or whatever it is that we can do, helping them to have their holy wishes fulfilled in other ways. All of these things are ways of serving our guru. Again, these first two are not as important as the third one. The third one, as I said earlier, is following the teachings that the guru gives you, practicing according to the guru's advice. The third is the main one, the yellow passage there, which is practicing without going against their instructions. We don't want to do the opposite. We don't want to, not pay attention to what the guru tells us to do and actually do something that is totally contrary to that. So the garland of birth stories that Jataka Tale says, the offering to be made in return for their help is practice that accords with their instructions. We engage in that practice. Practicing according to what the gurus are telling us is the best offering. I remember Lama Zopa Rinpoche making a comment once about like if the gurus tell you to teach or the gurus tell you to, meditate or the gurus tell you to do this, anything they give you the command to do and you do it based on receiving that advice from your guru, it's unbelievable merit. Unbelievable merit because that is the direct instruction of that enlightened mind coming to us and saying, this is what you need to do. Many people would go to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, for example, for lifetime practices, meaning things we want to do in this life that through Rinpoche's perception he saw were useful for us to remove obstacles in this life. as most of us know, it's probably going to take more than this one lifetime to get enlightened. You can attain enlightenment through the tantric path in a single lifetime. But most of us need to make sure that we use this life extremely well so that when this life ends, we aren't dealing with obstacles and things that could get in the way of continuing this path. So Rinpoche, would frequently be consulted by people and be given advice. This is what you need to do. Recite so many of this, do so many of that mantra, do so many satsas, these little, plaster of Paris statues and what have you. All these various practices Rinpoche would gladly give out as that heartfelt advice that is meant for you to follow. Whenever you engage in those kinds of practices, you're gaining unbelievable merit. So again, keep those things in mind, that that's the role that the gurus are playing for us, is helping us to mature our minds, ripen our minds. And so the most important thing is to follow their advice, to practice according to what they tell us. I had a quote, I think, from Lama Zopa Rinpoche in the very first class when I was introducing the Lamrim. Rinpoche said, Lamrim is the real meditation. This is what we need to meditate on. That's a general advice he was giving to a group of people, but every time we follow Rinpoche's advice of meditating on the Lamrim, putting our minds towards that topic, studying it in the way that we are here, how amazing. We have an opportunity to fulfill our guru's advice. Those of you who might see Lama Zopa Rinpoche as your guru, but nonetheless, any advice we receive from our teachers is important to pay attention to. We get to the more or less last topic. We have the benefits of reliance, and then we're going to look at the detriments, the faults, if we don't have proper reliance. There are a variety of ways that these are presented. There tends to be a number of 8, and that's what's in the homework for tonight for the discussion and for you to work with. And I've highlighted the 8 that are set out according to the materials that we have. But the scriptures say that one of the first benefit is that you will approach the state of a Buddha. In other words, you will near it, you will come closer to it. Secondly, that the victors, the Buddhas, the conquerors, will rejoice that when you please your gurus, you are pleasing the victors, the Buddhas. That you will not be deprived of virtuous friends. This is a karma. We haven't gotten to karma yet, obviously, but most of you have studied it. The karma is that essentially you get often a result that is similar to what you have done. It's called the result similar to the cause. And so essentially, when you devote yourself to a guru correctly and follow the guru's advice, you're creating the causes to have spiritual friends in future lives. It's not just this life that you're working with. You want to continue to have guidance life after life until we reach enlightenment, however many lifetimes it takes. So it's a very powerful karma. When we, of course, one of the detriments that are often laid out when they do a more detailed set of faults is that if you break that samaya, that commitment with your guru, well, then essentially you're creating the karma to not have gurus in your future lives. So, we want to see that side of it too. And I know this whole balance between the carrot and the stick is important in the West. We don't like the stick as much as we like the carrot. The carrot is presented here with these 8 wonderful benefits, so you get to taste them. We'll look at the faults briefly, and they're not set out as extensively in our text. But these benefits are well worth remembering, and certainly it has ramifications beyond this life all the way to Buddhahood, how we relate to and work with our gurus in this life. The next one, the fourth one, that you will not fall to the lower rebirths. This is not a, I don't want to think of this as like a guarantee that just because you have a guru that you won't have it. You again have to look at what is proper reliance. Proper reliance means all of what we've talked about, really continuing to devote yourself through thought and action in the ways that were described. If you have that, then you're probably engaging in actions that are not going to bring about a lower rebirth. You're going to be engaging in so much virtue that you will only have higher rebirths. That you will not easily succumb to bad karma and afflictions. Again, through the influence of the guru teaching you, giving you what you need to follow, what you need to discard, well, then you're going to have that. You won't succumb to bad karma so easily because you'll be trained in how to uphold positive actions, virtue. And the afflictions themselves will cease to be as powerful because you're practicing the antidotes to those and doing what you can to counter them. And since you will not transgress the conduct of bodhisattvas, remaining mindful of it, this is maybe things that are even more related to our bodhisattva path, your accumulation of the excellent qualities of a bodhisattva that ripen into Buddhahood will grow higher and higher. Just continue to accumulate more and more qualities. and all your temporary and ultimate goals will be accomplished. Furthermore, through serving and paying respect to the spiritual teacher, this seems to be the eighth one in the way they laid it out. I'll point out how Geshe Sopa, in his commentary, actually broke the blue one that's at the top of the screen there, easily succumbing to bad karma and easily succumbing to afflictions. He broke those into two, so it's a little different in his presentation. But this last one, it says, through serving and paying respect to the spiritual teacher, the karma for experiencing the lower rebirths is exhausted directly in this lifetime, through only slight harm to body and mind, or else through experiences in dreams even. This is what's said, is that the Guru acts as a powerful purification of our karma, helping it to be exhausted almost, in the moment. It is said also that the benefits are enormous, outshining the roots of virtue, of making offerings and the like to innumerable Buddhas. So there's incredible roots of virtue from doing that, making offerings to innumerable Buddhas. But this outshines it. Dedicating ourselves to the Guru in a proper way makes merits that are way beyond that. So those are the ways that these 8 benefits are set out. I'm not going to talk that much about them. I will share something in a moment from the Geshe Sopa's text that kind of goes through them in brief. But I do want to point out that there is this set of charts. I haven't really talked about them so much. In fact, I meant to introduce this one chart that's in there. This is called MLR charts from ILTK. ILTK is where I studied, Istituto Lama Tsongkhapa in Pomaya, Italy. But they did the basic program there with a group of people that put together these amazing charts. This was, I think, the second or third round of the basic program there. And so this one chart, chart 1A, this is kind of demonstrating the small scope, but you'll see that where we are right now is this little green box that's sort of olive green, relying on a spiritual teacher. And there are all these various topics that are here that we've been going through and so on. And anyway, the other thing that is a part of this that I wanted to point out is this chart 2, which you're welcome to take a look at as well outside of here. But it shows how there are 3 different presentations of these 8 benefits. One from our text, which is, again, what we just went through. One from the Great Lamrim, the Lamrim Chenmo of Tsongkhapa, where they're slightly different. And then the quick path, which is what liberation in the palm of your hands is set out on the basis of that. So you'll see again that they're slightly different when it comes to the shortcomings or faults. What we're going to see when we go back to the text is essentially 4. They often are not really enumerated. They're just sort of set out. But anyway, those 4 are identical to what we see in the Lamrim Chenmo. But we see a set of 8. And there at the bottom is that one that I mentioned. We will be without a spiritual teacher in future lives. That's the ripening of that result that is similar to the cause. If you've created the cause of turning away from gurus and not following their advice and so on, you're going to be bereft of a spiritual teacher in your future lives. So I just wanted to point that out. That's out there for you to peruse if you'd like, just to get an idea of how things are presented in other texts. That's because, again, the Lamrim tradition is sort of a living tradition and does bring in a lot of different things. But essentially, the point of all this was to really get a heartfelt appreciation for the benefits if we do dedicate ourselves to a guru, and the potential, again, for some detriments if we don't, or if we have some improper way of reliance. Let me go to my slides where I'm just going to talk about these 8 as they're set out by Geshe Sopa. He says, what are the benefits of relating to your spiritual teacher in the ways I have just discussed? We begin with a list of 8 benefits. The first one is to get closer to attaining the state of a Buddha. Properly relying on a guru is the fastest, most effective method for attaining Buddhahood. Again, it's the foundation of all good qualities. The second benefit, and I'm leaving out a whole bunch, he goes into way more detail on these pages, so feel free to, again, look at that first volume of his commentary on the Lamrim Chenmo. The second benefit of relying on your spiritual teacher is that it pleases all the Buddhas. As I've said, your teacher is a representative of all the Buddhas. Since the Buddhas are always concerned with the welfare and happiness of sentient beings, they will appear in an ordinary form as a teacher in order to benefit others. When people rely on that teacher to practice the path, of course that will please all the Buddhas, because we're pleasing the Buddhas by attending to the advice and so on of the Guru. Thirdly, when you trust your gurus take what they say seriously, and do everything they advise with great effort throughout your life, you will naturally develop a strong relationship with them. At the same time, you also plant the seeds to experience the same kind of circumstances in the future. So, the third benefit of relying on a teacher is that you will not lack a proper spiritual teacher in the future. The fourth benefit is to avoid falling into lower rebirths. If in this human life you rely properly on your spiritual teacher, the ripening of non-virtuous karma will be cut off in the future. By receiving the teachings, you will avoid negative actions. You will not create the causes to experience suffering in this or future lives. That's what I mentioned earlier, right? It's not that just that devotion automatically, removes all that. If we follow what the advice given by our gurus, they're of course telling us to engage in virtue and to abandon non-virtue. So we cease creating the results of lower rebirths. The fifth and sixth are how he divided the one that was just one in the presentation, the way it was set out in that chart. It will also become unlikely that you will be overpowered by strong mental afflictions such as desire, hatred, and ignorance. So the fifth benefit of relying on your spiritual teacher is that it becomes difficult to be overcome by negative karma. And the sixth benefit is that it becomes difficult to be overcome by the mental afflictions. Remember, these two, being overcome by karma and afflictions, were put together. But again, he chose to see them as two separate benefits. Number 7, then, is when you rely on your spiritual teacher with faith and confidence, you follow the path that you are shown exactly. In doing so, your actions will be consistent with the activities of a bodhisattva. Because you're constantly mindful, you engage only in virtuous actions, and your collection of merit, your positive potential, grows greater and greater. In this way, you eventually accomplish all your temporary and ultimate goals. This is the 7th benefit. So then, having consolidated those two, what did he, or having spread out those two, he's left one out somewhere. I can't remember which one it is, but anyway, he says, because of your respect for and devotion to your spiritual teacher, you apply yourself wholeheartedly to virtuous thought and action. You constantly work for the benefit of yourself and others. In this way, you complete the accumulations of merit and wisdom. I think we saw one around the accumulations of excellent qualities. I think that was the one that was left out. He puts on this one of merit, and he leaves off the 8th one that was in the other presentation. Don't feel like, again, you have to get the exact ones, but to just have a general understanding of at least some of these qualities. I think in the homework, I asked for people to, the questions, to have 4 of these that you can bring to mind. But that's the 8th benefit as Keshe Sopa sets them out. So again, let's go back to the text then and finish off this topic of looking at the faults if we do not properly rely, or if we have, a real separation from the guru that is really not so good. Again, if we do see things that gurus are doing that causes us to question, it's best not to focus on those. And if you need to physically separate from the guru, that's okay, but don't divorce them from your heart. Don't separate in terms of your admiration and appreciation and gratitude for what the guru has shown you, the kindness that they have given you. Faults of improper reliance. If you take someone as your spiritual teacher and then relinquish your reliance on them, you will be harmed by illnesses and evil spirits in this life. And in future lives, you will have to experience the immeasurable sufferings of the lower rebirth. So we have kind of 2 main faults set out there. Harmed in this life by illnesses, and they often refer to evil spirits. This is something that's very much ingrained in this tradition of spirit beings that could have a negative impact on us, but any kind of malevolent forces or, ripenings that would not be good for us in this life can happen if we break that relationship in an improper way. And then, of course, in future lives, we'll have lower rebirths and so on. 50 verses on the Guru says, never agitate the minds of any of your masters. If you do so out of stupidity, you will surely roast in hell. It was explained authentically that all those who disparage their masters will dwell in the horrific hells that were taught, like the Avicii. Avicii is the hell of unrelenting torment. It's the worst of the 8 hells, the hot hells. We'll look at that when we get to that topic in part 2. I know as Westerners, we may not have conviction in these hell realms, but they're karmic creations primarily through the force of very negative actions. And this is said to be a pretty powerful action if we have an improper relationship with the guru, where maybe we even yell at the guru and say negative things about them to other people and what have you, disparaging them. Not a very good action to engage in. Always hold them in that special place in your heart, even if, again, there's things that they do that you can't quite reconcile in your mind. A passage from the commentary on difficult points of Krishna Yamari says, whoever hears a single verse and does not apprehend the guru will be born among dogs 100 times, and then as someone of low caste. Again, this whole phrase of a single verse, and even Lama Zopa Rinpoche often says it's like you treat anyone as a guru who has taught you even a single verse of the Dharma. It doesn't mean anybody, like, me teaching you this. It doesn't mean I'm your guru by virtue of doing this. It means someone with whom you have that guru-disciple relationship who then does that, who teaches you even just a single verse. You, again, establish the relationship of yourself with a guru. Again, read Alex Berzin's book if you want clarity on that. But when you get to that fourth level of a spiritual teacher that we call a spiritual mentor or guru, Lama in Tibetan, we really want to make sure that we know that we're engaging in that type of relationship then. It's not something you just fall into, but you do have to be aware, again, that it's through taking any precepts from a particular being, taking any tantric empowerments from them, and so on, all those sorts of things, taking refuge. But then in your own mind, also seeing them as your guru, your guide. And that's especially with somebody who maybe you haven't received those things from. Maybe you haven't taken vows from them or, any tantric empowerment, but you are very connected to that being and you want to see them as your guru. Well, then you set that as relationship from your side. It's not something that is from the side of that being. Let me see. I did want to talk very briefly about meditating on the Lamrim. The next section we go into is all about the meditation session. And I wanted to at least introduce you to a little bit of advice that I've thrown out there that you're welcome to work with. And especially since we do have a little bit of a break coming on up, you might want to, use that time for that. But let's finish here. It says, aside from that, excellent qualities that have not arisen will not arise. That's said to be in our presentation the third fault. And fourth, those that have arisen will deteriorate and vanish. Like all the good qualities that we generated by being devoted to the guru for that time, they dissipate. They can completely vanish. So if you rely on non-virtuous friends and bad companions in turn, like if you turn away from the guru and then rely on people who are not proper guides for you, then of course your excellent qualities will also diminish, your faults will increase, and misfortune will befall you. Therefore, it was taught that this should be avoided in every way. So very quickly, the summary of the meaning of these points is the end of this chapter. The instructions widely known as Guru Yoga, we often use that term of kind of the seeing the Guru as a Buddha and thinking of the relationship we have with the Guru being one that embodies that thought, should also be understood according to what has been explained above. It will not be enough to perform the visualization in a single meditation session. You often do a guru yoga practice where you visualize the guru in front of you and merging with you and so on. When you pursue a Dharma practice from the depths of your heart, he says, you should rely on a spiritual teacher who guides you unmistakably over a long period of time. Don't think that you're able to just in one moment or one meditation session get the full impact of that relationship with a spiritual teacher. It takes a long period of time of being in their presence and being guided by them to, attain the results that we want. As Geshe Chekawa also said about such an occasion, when you rely on a guru, you may have doubts and abandon them. Since you will only lose without gaining if you do not know how to rely on them, it becomes evident that the cycles of teachings about relying on a spiritual teacher are more important than any others. That's why Tsongkhapa in particular placed them right at the beginning of the Lamrim. To conclude that paragraph, they are the root of fulfilling your long-held aspirations. Owing to our course afflictions, we do not know how to rely on a spiritual teacher, or we know how, but still do not do it. We have often engaged in many mistaken ways of relying on the Guru while listening to the Dharma. It is difficult for us to develop an awareness of that, even for the purpose of confession and restraint. We might not even remember when we're doing our purification, the things we've done incorrectly in our reliance on the Guru in terms of the receiving Dharma and so on. However, Having understood the benefits and faults as explained above, it is essential to sincerely confess any instances that do not accord with proper reliance and develop many strong resolutions. So you might even think of that in your purification. Those of you, I hope all of you, are doing purification daily, to think about any ways that you have transgressed the advice of the gurus and in any way disparaged the gurus, to purify that. Maybe we don't remember it all, but even that thought helps to counteract that. If you act in that manner, Tsongkhapa says, you will become before long like the Bodhisattva Sadaprabodhita and the like, and like the youthful Shuddhana, who was insatiable in his quest for a spiritual teacher. Again, I don't know all the stories to share here, and it's running out of time anyway, even if I had them, but we have these examples of people who were very devoted to their guides and were insatiable in that quest for a spiritual teacher and then to follow the advice. So we have again I'll put on the screen real quickly the quiz questions. Whoops, I've got to actually share that screen. If I just put it on my screen, it's not doing very much good. I think all of you have seen I did load that out there on the Google Drive that you have access to. The first one, to please identify and briefly describe the 2 points discussed under the outline of the way to rely upon the spiritual teacher in thought. Hopefully you remember those two from the beginning, towards the beginning of tonight. The 3 means of pleasing the guru in terms of the way to rely upon the spiritual teacher through actions. Which of these is said to be the main one? We talked about that. Please set out any 4 of the 8 benefits of relying on the spiritual teacher. Just again, give some appreciation for the quality or the benefits that we gain through that. And then the faults, I just put this as faults. Again, could insert 4 faults. We just went through those at the end there. I need to correct that little double period mark there. The thing I want to point out to you that you're welcome to just go take a look at yourself is on the Google Drive. So let me go back to the Google Drive where I had up that chart. I think that's where that is. Let me make sure that I'm pulling up the right one here because there it is. No, yeah, that's it. Okay. If you go back to the main menu, when you go to the link that's on the website for Thupten Norbu Ling, you'll see that there is this section on meditations and retreat. I've put a folder there that's called Advice for Gaining Realizations of the Stages of the Path, which is primarily based on this short text by Pabanka Rinpoche that was translated in the 2nd volume of Liberation in Our Hands, which again is on your book list. Essentially, I've got a little Word file here to start with, which gives you some of the basic advice. Maybe I can make this a little bit larger. 100%. Let me do like 150. Okay, so you have files on the Google Drive in this folder. And essentially, you have the text, which is the short text by Pabanka Rinpoche called How to Meditate on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. That actually you may have encountered before if you ever did Module 8 of Discovering Buddhism, Establishing a Daily Practice. I always teach on that there. But again, I also have a separate teaching I did that you're welcome to watch. Again, and maybe there's other people teaching on this that will teach it better than I do. I'm just giving you this as a possibility for you to explore. The second file is the presentation slides from that teaching I gave back in 2019. There's also an additional reading that I posted there called Hearing, Thinking, and Meditating by Geshe Jampa Tekchong, who I had the honor of receiving some teachings from. Wasn't one of my main gurus, but that is also a part of the DB module 2, How to Meditate. So both of those you may have encountered if you did Discovering Buddhism previously. And then I have the link here that you can go to. If you can't click on it, you can copy it and put it in your browser, and you can watch the teaching. It's about an hour and a half where I taught on this text, short text by Pabanka Rinpoche. I didn't go through the entire thing. There's these slides. I'm not going to pull those up. Here's the text by Pabanka Rinpoche. Whoops. And you'll see that essentially it gives some basic advice on analytical meditation versus stabilizing and so on. And then it goes into various topics of the Lamrim, which begins, of course, with the spiritual teacher. Instructions on how to develop the spiritual realizations associated with properly serving a spiritual teacher. So you can begin to use this if you have some desire to do that, to go through the various ways to meditate analytically on that. because that's the whole purpose of these teachings, is to help you to gain realizations of these stages of the path. He goes on to talk about some of the other topics, but essentially this is something you can refer to and give some wonderful advice. And at some point, I'll probably say a little more, but if you watch the teaching that I gave, I don't need to say too much more because I think I said it all there. But then again, this is the article from Geshe Jumpa Tek Chok, which is really quite nice. I really like that. It's from a book of his teachings on the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. Before we leave this too, though, and get to our discussion group, sorry, I'm cutting into those a little bit tonight, not too horribly much, but I also want to point out one of the books on your book list, reading list, is a book by Kathleen MacDonald, Venerable Sangye Kadro, which is, let me pull up my Kindle and I can go to that. Whoops. It's this book, How to Meditate on the Stages of the Path. And in the appendix 1, she didn't put this in the full Lamrim main body of the text. And it's because it is a more complicated teaching for people who are new to the Dharma. So she didn't want people who were brand new to the Dharma coming in and immediately working with that topic. So again, she has a whole little description of this. She goes into the need for a spiritual teacher, which we talked about last week. And there's some advice here towards the end of it about how to meditate on all that. The qualities of an ideal spiritual teacher we talked about last week. Contemplate these qualities one by one, and so on. So she gives some nice advice and goes through the 10 qualities. It's a really wonderful section and goes through the qualities of a suitable disciple. And again, the recommendation that we check whether we have these and our determination to develop them if we don't. Goes on to the benefits of relying on a spiritual teacher that we just talked about. Again, she gives a slightly different presentation, but covers many of the same, points. And then how to rely on the spiritual teachers through thoughts, the faith, training in faith, as well as gratitude and respect. And then the actions of making offerings and so on, offering service, practicing the teachings. It's a nice little thing. And I don't know if you have this book or not, and I'm not saying you have to get it, but it's a really wonderful way that the teachings are all set out in a very compact way to meditate on. Because remember, again, the whole point of this, as I was saying, is really for us to incorporate these topics into our meditation practice. And certainly, if you can do that for this topic over the next few weeks until we resume, we're going to talk in the next class in 2 weeks from tonight. Again, next week is Losar, so I'll be here leading Guru Puja. We're going to go into the meditation session and how to structure that. And then I'll talk a little bit more about what we might do in the course of that. Because I do have some additional bits that I put out on the internet, but I didn't want to get into too much of that tonight. Just to introduce this topic to you so that you can spend some time, if you wish, in the next 2 weeks doing that. All right. Okay, so you have a little bit of work to do now with breaking into groups. Maybe take just a stretch break, a really quick stretch break. Come back if you're online and you'll be assigned. Shayla will kindly do that, assigning people to a Zoom room to be able to discuss these topics with others. And you can even discuss the 4 ways that you can reason through having seeing the Guru as a Buddha, if you want to discuss that. It's really up to you, whoever's in that group. And then we'll form a group here as well. And those of you who are leaving, be sure to dedicate the merit from tonight before you kind of go to bed or whatever it is that you're going to do after this. So, all right, I'll see you all shortly. I'll join one of the groups tonight as well. So, thank you. All right. Any comments from tonight? Oh, I may need to keep this in to hear because, again, I don't think those are broadcast over the speakers here. Let me keep this in. So, the question, anything you need to share? You can hear me, yes? Yeah. Okay. I might mention Cody's put his Zoom room address in the chat box that he said during the time where we're not meeting, if anybody wants to like coordinate a meeting and meet there or something. We'll see if we can get that information out in a larger way because I didn't see his message to offer that until many of the people had already left. So anyway, I'm going to copy that and see if there's a way to get that to folks. And then again, you can just I don't know, it'd be hard just to show up there. It might have to arrange some sort of a time. It could be, again, next week on Wednesday, there will be puja here, but then the following week we meet online, and then the following week after that, there is no meeting at all. So certainly on that Wednesday night at the usual time, you could meet in that Zoom room without any problem. Um, but anyway, we'll figure something else out about that. But no comments or questions? Nothing came up in the discussion or
I think there's a question posted in the chat, Don.
um was that the one earlier about the
The guru.
when they've passed away?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'll talk about that next time, I think. But yeah, we got into that a little bit in our group, actually, about how I don't think that that means that then because that form of that being has gone, that there's a severance of that connection in any way, so that anything we do to fulfill that guru's wishes after they passed is equal to fulfilling them when they're there. I don't think there's really any difference in my understanding. Maybe run that by Geshe Sherab and make sure that's his understanding as well. But yeah, it seems that again, especially if we are holding that view, and if this is reality, that this is a Buddha simply manifesting in that form, well, that continuity of that Buddha continues on. And there's no that's not gone, just that appearance, that emanation of the Buddha that we see as an ordinary being that we are relating to as a guru. That happens and has ceased, but the guru's mind, the Dharmakaya, continues on and manifests in another way. And that's the whole point of these reincarnations is that we then have a new form of a being that is appearing according to the karma of that particular group of people that are going to be served by that being and so on. So you're really pleasing the mind of the Buddhas through pleasing the guru and fulfilling the guru's wishes in whatever way that you do, even after they've passed. So I don't see it as being, something that changes with the lack of that physical being in our world. So that's my logic. And I'm sticking to it. So let me just copy this one thing down here so that I make sure that I have Cody's stuff. So, okay. All right. Any other comments? And simply unmute if you do have something you wanted to share or anyone in the Gompa. Okay. So again, you do have 2 weeks here where you can work with viewing some of what I put up on the screen earlier about the meditating on the stages of the path, as well as just to catch up with reading or anything else that you want to do or read ahead if you'd like to do that, if you're all caught up with reading. Again, you don't have to read by any means all the texts and all the passages that I've highlighted for you. Just if you want to read a few of them to be able to, have some additional information. Because as I said, there's only so much information I can give in the course of an hour and a half every week. And this is a condensation of a lot of what was in the larger Lamrim by Tsongkhapa. So you end up with an abbreviation of a lot of points. So let's do our dedication prayers, and if there are no other comments or questions, let me make sure I'm pulling up the right file here. I think that's it. Yes. All right, let me move this out of the way. Okay, dedication prayers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. So even if we don't have a guru, or depending on our relationship to the Dalai Lama, making prayers for the good health and long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and for his holy wishes to be fulfilled, without a doubt, creates causes for us to have beings like him in our lives. So we can think of him, we can think of any other teachers we have or any other teachers that we feel some connection with in our world, spiritual guides who are here to help us. And we create the same sorts of thoughts towards them, wishing for them to have good health, long lives, all their wishes fulfilled when we recite this prayer for His Holiness. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then out of our strong desire to have our spiritual director, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, be back and connected to our community through his reincarnation being identified and everything to be auspicious for raising that child to become a great leader, a great teacher, a great guide for us and all beings. We recite this prayer. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious teachings, and precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And let's dedicate for all those beings we're holding in our hearts. And, there's never a shortage of beings to think about in terms of those who are suffering in more kind of overt ways, dealing with illness or obstacles to their well-being, those who are dying or who have died recently, and those who are in really difficult situations in our world due to harm from the elements or human conflict, what have you. We send this positive energy out to those beings that we're thinking of in particular, so that they can be free from all of their suffering and find the path that leads to true happiness and all the causes and conditions that will lead to that. And may this be so for all beings, so what we've done here together tonight. Okay, thank you all for joining tonight and for continuing with this course. And I will look forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks. Again, you might join next week if you wish to celebrate Losar. Might keep in mind, Losar is that first 2 weeks of the new year, and they're very powerful. So from February 18th, which is next Wednesday, all the way through March 3rd. March 3rd is kind of the culmination with the first full moon of the new year. So those are very powerful days for meditation practice and so on. So keep that in mind. All right. Okay. See you all. Be well. Thank you again so much. Thank you, everyone.